Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for not taking a long lunch and choosing me over the other guy. That was really nice of you. Thank you so much. My name is Taylor Dondich. Yes, I am the Chief Technical Officer for ProcessMaker. That is my Twitter handle. I'm located at @Dondich. I'm also available on Twitch. I Twitch under Adventures in Programming, where we program random open source projects, usually using a combination of Laravel and Vue.js, but sometimes we go off the deep end and go into other topics as well. Today I am talking about enterprise application development with Laravel. Enterprise is a bit of a buzzword, a keyword. We'll talk a little bit about what that exactly means in the scope of this conversation. And, this is kind of I think this is really the first time that I've been here at Laracon and probably the first time that you've met me. So I'm going to go a little bit over some of the spots where I worked at, some of the lessons I learned there, and then we'll go into some of the more techie stuff. Anyone here work at Yahoo? Nobody has? Well, that's obvious. Yahoo is not necessarily the most prominent place to work at. I joined Yahoo in 2007. In 2007, before that, I was working for a few other companies, working on some Java infrastructure. And then after 3 days of interviewing at Yahoo, they offered me the job. And the hiring manager sat down with me, and he asked me a very interesting question. He said, "What do you want to work on?" And I thought that was a very, very interesting question for a hiring manager to ask. And so I said, I've been working on Java for quite a few years now, and I would rather do anything but Java. And PHP obviously being a very heavy language at Yahoo, I was really preferring that. And he said, "I don't think that's going to be a problem." And if anybody knows Yahoo, that is warning sign number one. Yahoo purchased this company called Fairchase. Fairchase is kind of like Expedia, but dead now. Fairchase was purchased in 2004 by Yahoo. That's what it looks like if you want to blast from the past. That's what good UI looked like back then. And what's very interesting is the hiring manager on my first day sat down and said, "Taylor, I've got some news for you." He said, interesting enough, the 3 years after the acquisition has passed and all the engineers from Fairchase all of a sudden just left. And guess what? It's written completely in Java. So I guess that's going to have to be my career choice for the next few years, maybe at Yahoo. But you know what? I asked myself, is that really big of a problem? Because, if people bring up, quote unquote, enterprise application development, Java always comes up into the conversation. And so I was like, you know what, Java probably has enough stuff in there where the code base can't be that bad. I mean, there's nobody there to explain it to me, but I've seen plenty of Java code bases. They should be self-explainable. So I took a look at the code base and nope, absolutely not. It was the most horrific thing I have ever seen. The engineers were very lucky to leave and cash out at that point. So one of the lessons that I kind of learned there is that tools do not define enterprise. Has anyone ever had a project that they were working on, they tell their friend, they're like, "Oh, you should have wrote it in Ruby," or "You should have wrote it in Java," or whatever. This is personal bias. I do believe that there is a place, there are pros and cons to various languages and for different problems, but you don't have to necessarily fit into one mold whenever somebody brings up the term enterprise or high scale or web scale, if that terminology still exists. That was one of the important lessons I learned there is take a look at the problem that you're trying to solve, the resources you have, that could be the knowledge, the people you have, and then solve that problem. So after my prison sentence at Yahoo for a few months, I decided to jump ship and join Splunk. I joined later that year. Anyone familiar with Splunk? Yeah? Splunk is a wonderful company. They build really good visualizations and data tools for big data, usually around IT forensics analysis and log aggregation. But here's the thing. I was hired in a different department to handle infrastructure for their customer portal. And this customer portal was written in a custom code base that nobody knew. And in order to understand how the application worked, I did what a developer would normally do, and that is start debugging or console log or output out to a log file. And that was some of the code that I wrote. Has anyone else screwed up like this? Yes? Show of hands? Couple people are like, yeah, I did. Yeah, I made that code, and that code was actually pushed to production for 3 months. Yeah, that was a really big issue. Splunk had to email all of their customers, invalidate their logins, tell them there was an internal data breach, and I didn't get fired, but my God, they made fun of me for months and months and months. And so the message I have from that is to err is human, but it really takes some real finesse for a programmer to really screw things up. We are human. We make mistakes, and these mistakes are in our software. And whenever somebody brings up the quote-unquote enterprise keyword, they're not immune, right? And so it's very important that when we're building quote-unquote enterprise software, we have tool chains and processes in place to protect us from human error. So whenever we're talking about extensive unit tests, CI/CD pipelines, things like that, that helps to protect us. And so that is actually very important. After Splunk, thankfully, like I said, I didn't get fired. Splunk went through a IPO, which was very successful. I decided to head over to a company called MaxCDN. Anyone heard of it? Yeah, a couple. If you have heard of any of these companies, jQuery, Bootstrap, Font Awesome, JS Deliver, even WP Engine, you were using MaxCDN. MaxCDN is a global content delivery network, accelerating content worldwide. If you were using the jQuery CDN or Bootstrap CDN, you were actually using MaxCDN. Which was fantastic, a wonderful position that I held. They too also had a web application that customers would use to manage their account, manage their content, take a look at reporting, things like that. And when I joined and started talking to the team saying, hey, what are these tools built in, they did mention this control panel, which was pretty much a very pivotal part of our offering, and said, well, it was written in this framework called Sonic. Anyone hear of the Sonic framework at all? No, because it's dead. This is still the active GitHub repo. I say active, quote unquote, because the last commit was 7 years ago. Take a look at the keywords. It is everything we would want in a framework, right? It's fast, it's lightweight, runs on PHP. Back in the day, it was PHP 5.3, and it's MVC framework. That's cool. But as I dug into the code base that our team members were building, I noticed that they were building a lot of the things that you would expect out of a framework that kind of do the heavy lifting for you. And that would be things like database queries, input data sanitization, cross-site request forgery, protection, things like that. And I kept asking the team, I'm like, why are we building all these things by hand? And they said, well, we don't know how to do it in Sonic. I said, well, why don't you look up the documentation? And they said, well, go ahead and try. So I pulled up the homepage, and that was it. Yeah, so that project is dead. And so I just wanted to kind of bring up this really interesting metric. While I was making that slide, I said, you know what? How many PHP frameworks could there possibly be right now? And so I just did a GitHub search, right, for PHP framework, and over 16,000 results came back. Obviously, not all of them are PHP frameworks, but there's a ton of them out there, right? You get drunk at 3 a.m. and you go, you know what, I could build a better router. And so, here's another article that was published just a couple months ago. 42 frameworks to watch out for in 2018. Who has time to evaluate 42 PHP frameworks? That's insane. And the point there is, in 5 years, 2 years, even 1 year, how many of those 42 frameworks are going to be around, right? When I finally asked, hey, who chose the Sonic framework, everyone's like, well, that guy's been gone, like, years. And that's a story that we kind of fall into, right? And so the message there is that tools evolve and they degrade over time, and that enterprise is a moving target. It means if you are building quote-unquote enterprise software, your tool chain has to evolve. It needs to make sure that it's being vetted, that the tools that you're using are also growing and adapting to the changing technology as you do as well. So I've been using the term enterprise software quite a bit. I know it's buzzy, and people are like, what the hell do you mean by that? I looked up the definition on the internet, so it must be true. Enterprise software is computer software used to satisfy the needs of an organization rather than individual users. So I thought that was a really good, very broad definition, but enough to satisfy this talk. Really, enterprise software at this point is to satisfy a group of users rather than an individual. So if you're building a SaaS product for business or anything like that, you do fall under the category of enterprise software. I don't care if it's 5 people or 5,000, that is enterprise software. So here are some expectations that we can derive from enterprise software, knowing that we are dealing with organizations other than individual users. Security. Security is a very important aspect of enterprise software, right? You know, GDPR, a lot of people have been bit by that in the last year. A lot of people are seeing a lot of these data leaks in the news, so obviously that's extremely important for them. They're hyper aware of this topic. So enterprise software has to grow with the security demands as we grow. Enterprise software has to be stable, right? Organizations are no longer accepting downtime at all. You see this in news stories all the time. Google's down, Slack's down for 2 minutes. Hide your kids. It's pretty insane. There is stability requirements in enterprise software now, and the organizations demand it. Customizable. Enterprise software has to customize to organizations and their needs, right? No organization runs similar to the next organization, and now groups of people are expecting their software to be just as flexible and dynamic as they are. This falls in line with the wonderful talk that Jenny gave at the beginning of the day. You're going to have different organizations from different cultural backgrounds, and they expect their software to adapt to their needs. And then also evolve. Enterprise software has to grow as the organizations that use it grow, right? Additional feature sets. We're now living in a very diverse ecosystem of services, and they expect their software to be able to speak and interact in those ecosystems. So coming back to present day, I joined ProcessMaker in 2016. I've been extremely happy with this choice. Here's a collection of the customers that use our software. You can see a lot of wonderful names there from all types of different industries. Over 1 million active users use our software, and what do they use it for? So ProcessMaker is business process software which allows organizations to design and visualize their business processes and then execute those business processes. And those business processes may require human interaction, usually through some kind of form system or through their mobile devices, and then also some level of service orchestration that needs to be done automatically. And then after process execution, be able to optimize those processes as time goes on. And as such, in all these important organizations, from what we can track, over 50 million active requests or cases or process executions happen per year. And this is tracked on our commercial software as well as our open source software. So ProcessMaker is available as open source, so you can download it, install it, things like that. This product is installed on-premise in our customer environments as well as in the cloud. But ProcessMaker has been around for, well, over 15 years. And as such, does anybody here manage a code base that is 15 years old? Anyone? We've got a couple people here. So some of the problems I'm going to talk about are going to feel very relevant to you. So talking about the current state of security, I did talk about previous organizations that I worked with and the fact of having a kind of home-built frameworks being in place. It was no stranger to us. Back when ProcessMaker started, it wasn't a full application, but a collection of small utilities. And over time, that kind of merged into a complete web application. And as such, there wasn't really a lot of time to vet there really was no good, solid web framework 15 years ago, right? Like Composer didn't even exist. Namespacing, PHP 5 wasn't around. So it was very difficult to kind of evaluate any solutions for that. And as such, a lot of the things that deal with security, including my stupid fiasco of dumping usernames and passwords, weren't available then and had to be built by hand. And as such, as the company evolved, we had to continue to maintain those security issues, and that becomes very problematic. talking about the current state of stability. Over 15 years and no good architecture planning up front, it has become more and more prevalent that there wasn't very good code coverage, really next to no unit testing because everything was intermingled, tightly coupled. And it's kind of like confession hour, but I mean that happens with a code base that long. Especially when the business itself is young, the software is young, and you're just trying to pay people on time. That means that you don't have time to do a lot of that clean architecture review or anything like that, especially when the technology just simply wasn't around. So in current times, a lot of it was just a lot of issues that are found as the code continues to progress, and a lot of the testing had to be done manually. We actually have about 10 QA engineers who work almost near around the clock who are constantly having to manually test the current code base just because it's too difficult to decouple these elements inside the code base. And that's just the reality of things with a code base that old. Customization. Because customization wasn't thought of at the beginning, it's actually quite hard to customize the application. We have professional services teams that build out customizations for customers, and every customer that uses our software requires some level of customization through screen customization and things like that. And they usually have to approach it with a very hacky approach. It's not the cleanest design, but it can be done, and we do satisfy our customers, but the level of effort for engineering takes a very long time. And then evolution. Like I said, because there isn't very good architecture in place, it makes it very hard for the product to evolve. It's harder for us to design features that can just be added in because there was no architecture cleanly in place to provide such facilities. So, how do we use Laravel and the Laravel ecosystem to try and overcome some of these problems? So now we're going to talk about some of the solutions. So when I joined, one of the major pain points of the product was performance. So we have very large enterprise customers around the world who are processing millions of cases a year, and their data set gets very, very large. And we're constantly querying for the similar set of data over and over and over again. And so obviously the ideal solution to that is caching. But in the current platform, it was all over the place, and it was very difficult to try and build out caching through homebrewed code base. And so we took a look at the ecosystems out there and see what could we plug in that could potentially be the easiest way with the minimal amount of engineering effort. And so we did take a look at Laravel's caching system. Okay. It's easy to configure. Everybody, who here uses caching in Laravel? Almost everybody should raise their hands, right? It's absolutely easy to configure. It just requires, modifying your .env file, and all of a sudden you have the ability to connect to multiple backends and the configuration of that. It's easy to use. Obviously, it has a very, very clean API using the cache facade or the cache helpers. Has support for different cache backends. That was amazing. That means that we have a lot of flexibility for our various on-premise customers. And also, it was easy to test, right? Because of a unique property of facades, which I'll go into later. So the question really was, how do we use Laravel's caching without using a full Laravel application, right? We have an existing code base. We obviously can't pipe everything through Laravel. How can we adapt and use Laravel's caching without rewriting the entire system? So this is the approach that we took. If you want further detail, do talk to me after the talk. So the first thing we did, and I apologize, thank you very much. This is the modification to composer.json. All we did was require the Laravel framework. We did not build a full Laravel application scaffold like the Laravel Composer project would do or anything like that. If you're familiar with the app.php config file, this was the app.php file we used. You can see that it's been stripped of most of the functionality, right? We have no aliases for the service container. We loaded only the providers needed in order to load caching as well as error pages for caching if needed. And we loaded just enough configuration for cache configuration, right? Cache lifetime and such. And then somewhere in our boot up, all we had to do was initialize a Laravel application. That was it. So what you see is missing is all the other providers that provides all the additional functionality. All we did was bootstrap the providers that were required for caching, as well as the Laravel application itself. We didn't start a CLI kernel. We didn't start an HTTP kernel. And so this is the kind of code that we would see in the application code base. The reason why this was non-performant, you could see this weird paddle decrypt, which would actually decrypt a string, and that would take a lot of CPU time. Fetching information out of the license manager, which would require parsing a very large license file. And this code was ran nearly on every request to the system. And with very large enterprise organizations, that would be thousands of executions every second. And then so it could be very CPU intensive, very file I/O, because the license files are on the disk. But the data would never change. And so this was a perfect opportunity for doing caching. And because we adopted Laravel's cache system, the new code looked simply like this. There were 2 lines added, and one of them was a closing paren. Right? All we had to do was use the cache facade remember, and then all of a sudden, we had the ability to cache our data. And so the quick advantage was, man, that was an easy performance addition, right? We bootstrapped Laravel in the most minimal way, and we were able to add just a couple lines throughout the code on our most hit-intensive spaces, and all of our performance issues were alleviated. They weren't gone, but they were alleviated with the minimal engineering effort. And then all of a sudden, we can go back to our customers and say, guess what? We have caching for our most critical data, and we can adapt to your caching environment. That opened up the doors quite a bit for us, and then also better to scale. So we were no longer highly performant on the file I/O or the database access. Our caching layer could scale horizontally, and there you go. And also, it was easier to test. We could actually start writing tests now that were related to any of the functionality where we were using caching, and that was fantastic. So now that we got a taste of the goods, what was next? So we continue to slowly adopt those Laravel services as they make sense in our current code base. That's ProcessMaker 3. And so we've recently started adopting a little bit of Eloquent where it makes sense, database queries, things like that. But still, that code base is still very tightly coupled. And we really took a look at it and said, well, what do we do? Do we do a slow transition to something that uses Laravel? Or do we continue to kind of maintain that code base and go somewhere new? And so the question was, well, do we continue to kind of build iteratively, or do we just go all in, and do we buy, quote unquote, buy a solution off the shelf and try and build on top of that? So I don't know if anyone's familiar with this comic. Yeah, I'm pretty sure, right? People bring this up all the time. This is all about, SQL injection, right? And not thinking about it, and then all of a sudden, all your data is gone, right? The fact is, you're not that smart. I'm not that smart. As individuals, we're not very smart developers. You're drunk at 3 a.m. No, you're not going to write a better library than the next guy. But together we can be. And I really think that those statements defines open source. And Laravel is a fantastic open source project. I've contributed to the Laravel project through a few issues as well as PRs. But hundreds of people around the world are contributing. Tens of thousands of people are using it globally. So it just makes sense, based off of what I talked about previously, about the previous environments I talked about in regards to home-built frameworks and things like that, to adopt a framework that can do all the heavy lifting for you so that you can focus purely on what you're trying to do, your value proposition. It's okay to build your success on the back of others' hard work, okay? Because together, we are a much stronger product as a result. So I'm going to go over a couple of the points. We are now building the new ProcessMaker version from the ground up using Laravel as its core. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of the things and potentially go through a very, very quick demo of the product as it stands now, and highlight some of the things where Laravel has really helped us out. I think we're all familiar with Laravel security. We know that authentication is included, very strong hashing with support for bcrypt and as well as Argon 2 if you have a more recent PHP version. Very strong encryption, cross CSRF protection, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, passport for OAuth authentication for your APIs, and the list goes on even for authorization. And just because, obviously, we get all that out of the box, we don't have to think about it anymore. And all of that stuff, surprisingly, we had to deal with from the beginning by hand. But now that can all just be handed off to Laravel. I'm not going to go too much into that because we're all aware of that. But let me talk a little bit about stability with testing. This was a big thing because when we look at Laravel's testing facilities, we went, wow, there's so many helpers out there and really good architecture in place that it really kind of pushes us towards the path of good unit testing. Who here unit tests all their code or the majority of their code? Only a few hands. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. There's so many good facilities with unit testing with Laravel. I do suggest that you read up on that documentation. It's fantastic. I'm not going to go into all of the unit testing stuff, but what I do want to highlight was something that I found very fascinating that surprisingly the Laravel documentation is kind of sparse on. By the way, that is why you unit test. I'm not sure if you can find the error. Yeah. An assignment instead of a comparison. I actually had an engineer write code like this, and then the QA engineer went over to him and said, there's a problem with your code, and he said, no, it's a problem with PHP. As if they got like if-else comparisons incorrect. That was pretty weird. But what I want to talk about is facades. Who here knows what facades are in Laravel? Of those hands, how many people have written their own facades? Like just a small portion of that, right? You should be writing your own facades. They're extremely helpful. But they're very, very sparse on documentation. I found that very interesting. One of the things that we found extremely useful with Laravel facades and testing was facade mocking. Was the ability to have a facade mock requests and then mock the result. So there is our controller. We're just simply getting a key from cache, but then there's our test where we're setting up the cache facade and saying, hey, eventually that cache should receive a get call with a test key parameter and return the test value as a result. And that's how we can test things that are utilizing cache facades. I think that that is extremely useful. But here's an example where you might want to write your own facade. Who here uses Guzzle? Yeah, very popular. Yep, everybody's almost raising their hand, right? Here's an example, a controller that is using the Guzzle client. Notice we're using the Laravel container to just give us an instance of a Guzzle client. But here we are doing a GET request, but then we have an if-else. We could have also done a try catch for certain error results. Here we're just checking for the status code does not equal 200, but if it does equal 200, we return the body, right? And here's what's really interesting. I looked up online, like how would you normally test that error condition, right? If the status code does not equal 200. And it can, there's a few solutions to that out there, but they're all pretty complicated. But with facades, it makes it extremely easy to test this. Here's an example of a facade written. This is a custom one. We know that facades really are just simply proxy objects. And what they have is one required method called getFacadeAccessor. And it talks to Laravel's container and says, hey, get me whatever is registered here. And here, I'm just saying, just get me back a Guzzle HTTP client. And the Laravel container returns me back a new instance of Guzzle, right? But now I've modified my controller to this. Now I am using my custom Guzzle facade and saying, you know, Guzzle get, right? It's proxying that get request to that Guzzle, that actual Guzzle instance. And now here's my test that tests that error, right? I'm mocking the response that Guzzle would return. I'm mocking my Guzzle facade and saying, hey, I should receive get and then return that mocked response. Now all of a sudden I have error coverage. That is a perfect example of why you might want to create your own facade. Here's another one. So you are writing this API. Now, of course, this is a very simplistic example, but you know that You are part of the API team. You're writing the API layer. You're dealing with API authentication, stuff like that. And then you got this whole other set of morons who are writing the back end, and they decided to take a vacation. So you don't have a working back end manager yet. So what you can do, just to start writing your tests, because you've already sat down with them, you already know what methods you're going to call, you already know the data format that you're going to get back, just write a facade. Point it to nothing. Notice I'm pointing it to standard class. Laravel's container is going to return back just a blank object, and now all of a sudden, I've rewritten my code like that using the facade pattern, and now I can test it like that. I can mock data, I can mock responses, and there is no actual implementation of that service, but because I'm using a facade, I can just fake it. So because of that, and because of all of the extensive testing functionality that Laravel provides, we can write dramatically more stable software. We ignore the chicken and the egg problem. We can actually deliver faster because our backend team can continue writing implementation while maybe our middleware or our API layer team can actually continue writing out their tests and continue development without having to wait for them. So talk about CI/CD. Who has a full CI/CD pipeline in their organization? Oh, that's sad. Definitely adopt it. It tastes so sweet when you do. Let me give you a really brief rundown of how we use CI/CD in ProcessMaker. So obviously, all of our code lives in GitHub. We do use Git flow branching. So we have our master branch, develop, and then we have bug fix branches and feature branches. As our developers are committing to that, we are pushing it to Circle CI. Circle CI is a fantastic tool if you want to start adopting CI/CD without adopting Jenkins and having to deal with your own infrastructure. Circle CI is a fantastic tool. And in Circle CI, we're using Composer install, npm install. We're running npm run production to build our front end. And then we're running PHP unit ingest because we do test our front end and our back end. If that is successful, we use Circle CI to deploy to AWS. And so we have EC2 instances. Eventually, we're migrating over to Docker. Where on those EC2 instances, we can actually use the power of Laravel to do database migrations on there. And then we run tests against Sauce Labs for all of our browsers. And then also, we have separate instances of our branches deployed to QA environments so that stakeholders and QA teams can do additional manual testing if they so desire. So there's a picture of Circle CI. It's really hard to see, I apologize, but you can see that it's a nice path where we're constantly committing here. We have an average of 30 to 50 builds happen a day, which is pretty good for about 10 developers working on this specific project. We have other projects which are being built even more frequently. And in each of these builds, it goes through a process here. This is our Circle CI, which I'm not going to go into all the detail here, but is using Laravel's tooling to run PHP unit, right, with a specific set of environment variables. We're building our own custom .env file, which will eventually run in our test environment. We're packaging it up, we're deploying it, we're copying it over to our EC2 instances. And then we're actually building and running PHP Artisan Migrate and other PHP Artisan tools in order to basically set up the environment. And because we have that functionality, and of course we're testing with Sauce Labs and such, because we're doing that and using Laravel's functionality for .env files, specific .env files for different environments or environment variable overrides, it makes it extremely flexible for CI/CD tools. And so I would highly recommend it. And then, like I said, we also use continuous deployment, right? We deploy to EC2 instances so that our QA team, as well as internal stakeholders, whether it's support or anything like that, deploys out to EC2. Real quick, here's our Nginx configuration. I can share this with anyone who's interested. This allows us to do basically dynamic hosting so that we have a branch name, and then our test environment. Here it's .bpm4.qa.processmaker.net. And we automatically deploy to those branches, and we don't have to modify Nginx or anything like that. We don't have to bounce it because this type of configuration handles it for us. Let's really skim through this because we're starting to run out of time. Evolution through packages. So currently in the product, it is possible to create add-ons and new features. Of course, our commercial offering adds additional add-ons, but we do need to have an easier way of doing this. Right now, also, the ability to validate if a customer even has access to a feature is done through this. PHP code for is feature enabled, and it returns true or false from an AJAX request. Not very secure, right? Somebody can just go in, modify the code for is feature enabled, and boom, they have access to everything. So the way that we're fixing that is we're using Composer. We want plugins to be this easy to install using Composer require, and then maybe a vendor name and a plugin name. And the way we're doing that with Laravel is we are using Laravel's automatic package discovery, which is a fantastic feature of recent Laravel releases. And then even for our commercial plugins, we're using a tool called Private Packages, which creates a custom private Composer repository for us to use, as well as IonQ PHP encoder. I know we're not interested in commercial software, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But what it does allow us to do is store data in a plugin repo. We use CI to run the encoder, store the package. We upload the package to private packages, and then our customers should be able to just use Composer require or Composer update. And I think that's really fantastic. Customization. Customers always come back to us and they say, oh, we need that button changed. We need a different screen. If we go back to Jenny's talk about creating different interfaces for different cultures, different regions, it's very important for us as a global enterprise company to be able to accommodate that. And so we're using this package, Laravel theme. Anyone else use it? Do check it out if you are, if you have customers that are a global audience or things like that. Some of the key features is it allows you to override any blade template easily. I think that's awesome. And you can distribute these skins/themes as packages, which is also useful. Running a little bit out of time. Let's talk about one last big advantage that we have. Customizing through code. We are using Laravel queues/jobs with notifications with Laravel Echo very extensively. Anyone here doing queues, jobs? Yes. Everybody's hand should be up, right? All users expect all jobs to now be asynchronous. They shouldn't be waiting. Here's an example process that we have for an internal employee purchase request, right? We get that information from that employee. We talk to our enterprise ERP, which is through some code that the customer has, and then we do some decision making, and then we possibly have other scripts that have to run. So there's this human element as well as service orchestration. And the way that the current product works is that, yes, the user initiates an action, and then if that task requires some sort of service orchestration, that is usually done as a script, as a PHP script, that executes in the same request that the user is making. And then if there's problems with that script, like it has a fatal error, right? Somebody changed the script and it actually has a syntax problem, or it's talking to their ERP system, but that ERP system times out, or potentially that script opens up a data leak and exposes data, there's some serious problems there. And then also the other big problem is if that script takes forever, if that task takes forever, the user is updated synchronously, so it means that if it's taking a while, their browser is just spinning out of control. So how did we change that? So yep, user initiates an action. Then we see that the task queues these jobs via Laravel's job dispatch method. Right? We have a custom job, for example, for running a script task. And we take advantage of basically having queue workers that can scale horizontally and execute these in queue workers. And so if we're talking to an external system or talking to maybe some weird system that a customer has running in the corner that they don't know, but it's super critical for their organization, we hear this a lot. Customers say, why PHP? I don't want to code in PHP. I don't want to know PHP. PHP is not enterprise. Bah humbug. But we still want to approach those customers and say, we have a solution to you. Now, in the old method, we did not have that capability. The scripts had to run synchronously in the request thread. Here, though, because we've decoupled that, and we're running it asynchronously in our job, we have a lot more flexibility. What we decided to do was have the ability to support any language. So we currently have support for PHP and Lua, and we're just about done with Java and Node.js. These tasks run isolated in Docker containers, very lightweight, that get executed as commands, and that basically allows that kind of worker process to scale out. And what's great about that is the user is asynchronously updated, so when the task is complete, they are notified versus just waiting for it to spin. And that's using Laravel Echo and notifications. So I have a little bit of time. I'm going to go ahead and demo it. Now, this is the current code base for the new version. This is going to be released as a developer preview next week with general availability by the end of the year. You are available to go on GitHub and try it out yourself. Let me just make sure that I am logged in here. So this is the ProcessMaker interface. Let me go over here. This is our process designer. This is a very simple process that you might see in some sort of marketing agency where maybe the intern's like, okay, I'm going to draft a new tweet for a customer, but then it goes to the marketing manager and they have to kind of approve or proofread that tweet, change it before it goes out. And then we have two script tasks or two microservices that happen here. We have one service which is called add hashtags because we want certain hashtags to always be added to this customer's tweets whenever they go out. We don't want whoever's drafting it to be responsible. And then we have another microservice that actually posts the tweet to Twitter. This is something very common that we see. And so we have some human interaction, right? We have to have an interface for the intern to actually draft the tweet. So this is using our drag and drop form designer that we've built. It's also an open source project standalone. In case you're interested, I'll talk about that at the end. But it's a very nice draggable interface. It allows us to say, you know what, this text box is going to be the tweet, things like that. So we publish that form. We have another form for the marketing manager that approves the tweet, maybe makes any modifications. There's some validation rules that match kind of what you would expect in Laravel. And then we design those microservices, right? So in case, this is a Lua script inside our product. So we're basically saying this task will be executed by this Lua script if a customer was more familiar with Lua. Here we can see that we're pulling out of our task configuration a set of tags, and we are concatenating that to our tweet data, right? That's good enough for our microservice. And then we have another script here. It's a little long one for PHP because Twitter has some crazy OAuth handling. And this script basically sends that tweet out to Twitter, right? And so what we want to do is just run through the process of actually executing this process and see how it's being handled asynchronously through broadcasts and how that completely changes the way that our customers are going to interact with our product in the future. So here I am at my main interface. I'm going to go ahead and create a new request. This is all done live, so it's absolutely terrifying. So here is send a marketing tweet. It's going to create the job and then show me the details page. This page is being updated in real time. It's listening for Laravel broadcast requests using Laravel Echo. I have a task here called draft a new tweet. So I'm going to go ahead and open this. I'll open this in a new window. Here's that form that we designed in our drag and drop designer. And I'm drafting my tweet here. I'm going to go ahead and submit for approval. And once this is submitted, you can immediately see that it was reflected in the other browser in the status. I have an alert in my notification at the top, and already I can see that I have an approved tweet. But all of these things are happening in the background. They're all being queued. There's real-time notifications. Here I am, the marketing manager. I'm going to go ahead and approve and post that. And then I'm going to see that updated. This is the scary part. And then we can see that the add hashtags task completed, and then hopefully if the internet is fast enough, we see that the post tweet occurred. Now that all happened in the background. Our system was orchestrating that through Laravel queues and through job dispatching. In fact, if we pull up my Twitter, ideally we see that tweet. The internet is super slow here. While that's going on, we also embedded Laravel Horizon into our UI to actually give our customers visibility into their work queues. We can actually see that the notifications were created, that those 2 script tasks were executed. And then Twitter's just spinning. Oh, there we go. We can see that that tweet was posted. So we're actually able to use Laravel queues. Oh my God, it's still spinning. Laravel queues and real-time notifications to completely change the way that our customers use our product, which is fantastic. That is opening up the doors for us. And because of all the other things that Laravel is giving us with the clean architecture, package discovery, and just really guiding you through best practices when it comes to delivering code, and we haven't even talked about Vue.js yet, it's been fantastic, revolutionary for us. We're super excited to be part of the Laravel community. We're starting to contribute. We're starting to create some open source projects. Let me just point you to, and I hope this is fast enough, our ProcessMaker GitHub repo. There are a couple open source projects that we are working on. When you go to the ProcessMaker GitHub, you're going to see the ProcessMaker BPM project. That is the next generation version of our product that I was just demoing. Please take a look. We're always open to contributions. Naira is our open source workflow engine. So if you actually wanted to embed workflow functionality into your product, we actually made it open source, and as a component, it's framework agnostic, so you can plug it into Laravel apps very much like we did for our own, and add complex workflow rules. The Vue form builder, that's that Vue.js drag and drop form builder design, and that is also open source. Talking about those lightweight Docker containers, which executes those script tasks, we have those as well as open source. You're going to see some additional functionality for Node.js, Java moving forward. We also built out Laravel IET Next. So if you have localization or internationalization requirements for your JavaScript code, you might be familiar with IET Next, but you're also probably using Laravel translation. So wouldn't it be great to share your translations with Laravel with IET Next? That is a project that we have and that we're using. And also the Laravel Vue form elements. So if you're using Bootstrap, these are reusable Vue components that builds out Bootstrap compatible form elements that ties into a very rich Vue data model and updates in real time. So like I said, we're really excited. We're using Laravel to its fullest here with our solution. We saw a lot of huge benefit. We're looking forward to building out and releasing our next product by the end of the year. If you have any questions about the technology or the stuff that we're building, I look forward to talking to you. We are hiring. We're looking for extremely experienced Laravel engineers who want to continue pushing and contributing to the Laravel ecosystem. So again, if you're looking for an opportunity, please come talk to me. And that's it. Thank you.